evening. You're very welcome to this, the second webinar in the series from myself and my colleagues here in Teagasc, Sligo, Leitrim, Donegal. My name is Cian Condon. I'm a dry stock advisor based in Manorhamilton in County Leitrim, and I'll be your host here this evening. As we approach the lambing season, I'm joined here this evening by Dwayne Shiels, who's based in the Letterkenny office, and he'll be covering the preparation in lowland flocks, and also by Paddy Browne from the Ballybofey office, and he'll be covering preparation in the hill flocks. As usual, we'll try to keep things fairly interactive, and at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a question and answer function, and you can send your questions to the panel right throughout this evening's presentations, and I'll put the questions to them towards the end. Without any further ado, I'm going to call on Dwayne to share his screen, and we'll begin.
Is that all right, Cian? You see it there now?
That's perfect, Dwayne. Thank you.
So thanks very much, Cian. Good evening, folks. My name is Dwayne Shiels. I'm an education officer here with Teagasc and Letterkenny. I'm going to talk to you tonight on preparing for lambing. So opportunities to reduce lamb mortality and increase a bit in profitability. So I'm going to focus mainly on the lowland side of things, describing some risk factors to lamb survival, and I suppose things we can do to reduce these risks. I'll mention a few studies, 2 studies done as part of the PhD, looking at lamb mortality, a post-mortem study, and a risk assessment survey study. So let's see. So we'll start off with an introduction. So preparing for lambing and reducing the risk factors associated with reduced lamb mortality. Lamb mortality in lowland flocks, it's a key factor influencing yield productivity or the profitability in the farm. And a 3% reduction in lamb mortality is worth 10 million annually to the Irish sheep sector. So it'll result in an extra 100,000 lambs surviving each year, and it'll increase profits increase the profits to the Irish sheep sector by 10 million. So it is possible to consistently achieve this 10% mortality or lower in flocks that have a lower litter size. A 12-year study in Athenry by Hanron and Keady showed that a flock with an average litter size of 2 lambs per ewe consistently achieving 10% mortality. So it is possible to consistently achieve this low mortality, but significant reduction in this lamb mortality, it's only achievable if we identify the underlying causes and then target them causes specifically. So just I'm going to mention a bit on when and what caused lamb mortality first, and then I'll get into more some management practices we can do. So we'll start off with when does lamb mortality occur. We know that most of the mortality occurs in the first week of life. So 43% of these lambs are dead at birth, 15% die before 24 hours, 16% from day 1 to 3, 6% from day 4 to 7, and then the remaining 20 from 1 week up to weaning. So I suppose in other words, 43% of the lambs that die, they're dead before they hit the ground at all. And 3/4 of these lambs die within the first 3 days. So this is where we have to target to reduce their mortality. This is, I suppose, it's the lowest hanging fruit and where the greatest head we can make is targeting this 75% of this 3/4 of lambs that die in the first 3 days. Looking then, we've seen when it occurs, we want to see what are the main causes of it. So reduction in lamb mortality, it is difficult until we can identify these major causes. And I suppose the post-mortem is the best method to capture this information or to identify these causes. So this table just around the wheel here, we can see the main causes. We see infection and stocha, they're account for over half all the dead lambs. So infection on its own accounts for 32% of them. The stocha accounts for 20%. We have other causes, so that's your anoxia or your fluid in lambs' lungs, or maybe hypothermia, small lambs starving and things like that account for 14% of them. Accidents account for 5% and congenital defects for 4%. When you see one of the wages there with diagnosis not reached, that accounts for 19% of the lambs. These are lambs that there couldn't be a specific or a conclusive cause of death assigned to them. Then there was no necrosis or no results completed undertaken on 6% of them. So around the wheel there, we've seen the infection, the stocha is the main causes. Most of these causes are potentially preventable by good management practices. Some of them we're not going to be able to prevent, they're going to be inevitable, but most of them are potentially preventable, and we'll look at some of these here, management practices that can reduce it. So I explained when and why there. I'm going to now quickly go through, I suppose, some current management practices that we can be doing at the minute that's going to prepare for lambing this year, and some things maybe most of us will have them done, but just a wee reminder on what should be done this time of the year. So start off with scanning there. 80 to 90 days after ram joins, ewes should be fasted. I suppose this facilitates this, allows us to feed ewes according to the litter size, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. People who are housing ewes, there's a few points on that. So 75% of the ewes, lowland ewes in Ireland, are housed for lambing. When housing them, I suppose it's housing them on a dry day, getting these ewes on dry, that the fleece isn't wet. Grouping them then, where possible, by litter size and lambing date. So we're using our scanning information. We're using our rattle and the rams. We'll talk again about that in a minute. Foot bathing them before we put them in. So we want to avoid taking the infection into the shed if possible, especially in straw beds, and run them through a foot bath before we house them. It's not too late yet to test their silage. Lots of people are just housing now or just after housing. So before we start feeding these concentrates now in late pregnancy, it's not too late yet to test their silage. It's a good, now it's coming up to the time, mid-season lambing flocks, people that are lambing now, middle to the end of March, it's coming up time to give our Clostridium pasteuralis, your Heptavac, your Covaxin 10. So we want to do that 4 to 6 weeks out from lambing, and a fluke dose for liver and rumen fluke. I'm not going to mention too much on this. Paddy's going to go into detail on the liver fluke and the rumen fluke in a minute. So it's just looking at the stages of it and what to dose with. So I suppose, as I said earlier in the introduction, to reduce the risk of certain cause of mortality, we must be prepared with the correct tools for the job, or be prepared for the lambing. So it's no good if we need some of this stuff middle of the night, when often we do. We have to have it on hand there to use. So when I see there's a very good lambing inventory video done by Alan Bohan in Sligo Leitrim Donegal office there down in Leitrim there. It's on YouTube. It's the sheep net one. So it's looking at lambing inventory with everything you need to look out for. And so some of the basics here in the pictures, we're looking at our teat dip cups, or stomach tubes, thermometers, lambing gel, gloves, etc. But if you just want to look up that video on YouTube, it'll give you, I suppose, everything you need for it. Moving on then to a bit on feeding the ewe, and we looked at dystocia or difficult lambings there causing 18% or 20% of the lambs to die in that post-mortem study. So lamb birth weight, it is a main cause of lamb mortality, whether that be small, light lambs that die due to hypothermia or aren't able to eat up and suck, as seen in the post-mortem study, or the big lambs in post-mortem, so these large lambs that die due to dystocia. I'm going to speak a bit about feeding the ewe in late pregnancy now, and why this is important. So I suppose it comes down to a few main points really, and one of them being getting lambs of optimum birth weight, or getting lambs correct birth weight. So the optimum birth weight, it is dependent on litter size. We can see on the left-hand side here, we're looking at an optimum birth weight of singles being 6 kilos, twins being 5.6, and triplets being 4.7. So if we look then at the graph, we can see total mortality up the left-hand side, birth weight across the bottom, and then we have the 3 lines there that is indicating each the single, the twins, and the triplets, and for each of them, what birth weight's optimum. So we're not expecting everyone to bang out all your twin lambs at 5.6 kilos, like it's not possible. But if we look across that birth weight column there, anywhere between 4.5 and 6.5, the percentage of mortality in them twin lambs is down below 5%. So if we could aim to hit these lambs in between that 4.5, 6.5 kilos, then we're going to keep mortality low. Same then, it obviously changes for singles and triplets. But if we drop below that 3.5 kilos, we see a massive rise up 30-40%. Likewise, if we go above 7 kilos, so these are your shoulders, your light lambs, again, we're talking about dying due to hypothermia, or your large lambs with difficult lambing. The optimum birth weight, it can only be achieved with a good late pregnancy nutrition plan. So this should be based on expected lambing date, expected litter size, and forage quality, and then we increase the concentrates of quality or accordingly. So we're looking at rattling our rams pre-lambing, scanning our ewes, and testing silage. So what's the use of the rattle? It's too late now for this year, but for every other year, so for the following years, the use of rattle ramming, the survey found that 60% of farmers were rattling the ram, but only 7% were changing every week. So the more often that we change this rattle, the more accurate we can estimate the lambing date. And then the pregnancy scan, and then that gives us our litter size, or expected litter size. And knowing the both these, so knowing the expected lambing date and the litter size, we can then group ewes in late pregnancy and more accurately facilitate their nutritional management, or their what we're feeding them. So while it is difficult on some farms there to group ewes, I suppose, for if they have smaller numbers, I'll show a chart in a second looking at how much they should get each for litter size each week. And when we actually know the lambing date, we can then group, say, triplets are 3 weeks out from lambing, can be grouped along with twins, say that are a week out, or that are in the lambing the first week, and likewise twins are lambing, say, in the 3rd week of lambing, can be grouped with singles lambing the 1st week. So we can accurately group them, feed them accordingly, but we need to know that litter size and that expected lambing date. So we talked about the birth weight there and the importance of that late pregnancy nutrition plan. I'm going to go through it a bit more detail now and why it's important. So I suppose the first main thing on lambing down ewes and getting ewes right for lambing is that late pregnancy nutrition and avoiding it. The first point of here, avoiding a body condition score loss or a big body condition score loss in late pregnancy. So ewes that lamb down with a higher body condition score, these will wean heavier lambs. So there's a strong correlation in that. Every unit of body condition score that the ewe can utilize in lactation, it's worth the equivalent of feeding that ewe 5 25 kilo bags of barley. So if we can have it there, she must have that body condition score there to use in lactation. It's a lot more valuable then. So if we can maintain this body condition in late pregnancy and avoid that loss, it'll be a lot more beneficial to us and come up lamb there. So we'll look here at the last 8 weeks, the graph here. And we'll see that white line coming down at 80 days there, just after 80 days. That's kind of a scanning line there. That's coming into late pregnancy. We can see the blue line represents the growth of the fetus. That growth of the fetus, we can see it stays steady there. It's quite low, around 60, 70, 80 days, and then it shoots up sharp. So then that last month of gestation, we'll show in a second, the lamb's grown 50%. It's grown half its birth weight in that last month, and again a quarter in the last 2 weeks. So that's the important part. That's when we need to get the nutrition right. It's this nutrition, it'll help for fetal development. So we're going to have healthy, lively lambs. It also helps mammary gland development. So we need this mammary tissue to produce milk whenever she's lactating, also to produce colostrum. That colostrum, we need plenty of it, and we need it of good quality. However, in the last 2 months of pregnancy, the ewe's intake demand, it increases to 1.6 or 1.8 kilos of dry matter per day, apart from the last 2 weeks, and then drops off due to the available space in the rumen. So we'll look at that more closely now with this slide on the last 2 weeks. So we can see the energy demands of a ewe and say mid-pregnancy or dry is 0.8 UFLs. This then increases to 1.37 for say a 70 kilo ewe in late pregnancy in the last 2 weeks carrying twin lambs. The ewe can't get this energy demand from forage alone or from silage alone or from poor quality concentrate. So, and then I suppose it's a double-sided sword that the available space in the rumen, if we see the picture here, there's one lamb in that picture, we see the rumen on the left, the lamb in the womb there beside it. If there's 2 or 3 lambs there, as these lambs are growing in the last month, the last 2 weeks, getting into that, heavier into that, they're going to 3-4 kilos at that stage growing. That takes up that available rumen space. So the ewe, she can't eat enough to start with to meet it, and then a rumen, available space in the rumen is down. So what I mentioned there, we looked at that graph and how the lamb grows that 50% in the last month, 25% in the last 2 weeks. So it's to prevent twin lamb disease or to prevent the ewe going into metabolic diseases, we must meet these energy demands of the ewe while also ensuring enough protein to grow the lamb and to produce good quality colostrum. So a general rule for that there is we're looking at 100 grams DUP. So these are the two, we see the box below here, the 2 types of protein. We have rumen degradable protein or RDP, and then we have digestible undegradable protein, DUP. So the RDP, I suppose that's what's present in most feedstuffs. That's the protein part of most of the feedstuff feed. And the name suggests, as the name suggests, it's digestible in the rumen only. And late pregnancy, we said about the available space in this rumen being reduced. So we need to look at an alternative type of protein. So that's DUP. And this DUP, or this digestible undegradable protein, that's also digestible in the small intestine. And soya or soybean meal is the best source of that there, DUP. So while it is important to have this ration at 18-19% protein, it's very important to have 20% of that ration of soya or DUP in late pregnancy. So for instance, a twin bearing ewe or a ewe with twin lambs in her, in the last 2 weeks, we're heading up into that kilo or 0.8 to a kilo concentrate. But to get that 200 grams of DUP, so 100 per lamb, we need that 800 to a kilo of concentrate, and 20% it has to come from soya. So again, that's depending on silage quality, but as a kind of general rule, we're looking at that heading into that 800 grams to a kilo per head per day. When you go into that kind of ration, once you pass that 0.4 or 0.5 a kilo, that should be split in 2 feeds, evenly spread out, so 10 to 12 hours apart. We spoke there about the importance of these good ingredients and having soy in it. So this is just a wee chart here looking at the quality of them. So we have the traffic light system here showing feeds with good, medium, and poor energy sources. So the good sources there. When you read the label on a bag of meal or on the doc that comes to meal, we'll look at the percentage each ingredient will be in a decreasing order. So you want to see the ingredients in this green box here. So your cereals, your maize, barley, wheat, your soybean meal, pulps. You want to see that up at the start of the label or at the beginning of the list of ingredients. And then the ones in the red here, your poor feed, your wheat feed, pollard, palm kernel, that either not in the label at all, preferably not in at all, but if they are in the label, you want them near the end of it. So I've included an example ration here, a good late price nutrition ration here in the blue box here. We're looking at soybean meal there 20%, maize meal at 19%, barley 17%, soy hulls in there at 14.5%, beet pulp at 10%, rapeseed at 8%, molasses at 5%, and then your maize distillers and your mineral vitamins at 2.5%. So this is the kind of ingredients you want. You want them cereals and them that soybean meal, them good quality ingredients at the top of the list there with the most percent of them. And then it's all right to have your distillers or your lesser quality ones further down it. So I suppose a point we had in it was looking at the quality ingredients, and when buying a ration, you're not buying it in price only, you're buying it on the quality ingredients. And just a point in there. So if say we'll look at a table in a minute how much to feed each ewe, but if feeding say a twin bearing ewe late pregnancy there on average kind of silage, we'll be getting 25 kilos per head pre-lambing. So up from stepping that up from 6 weeks out up to lambing, them ewes will be eating 25 kilos a head. This chart we'll look at, we'll see the twins on the average silage coming up and stepping up to that. But if saving €20 a ton, it's only the equivalent of saving 50 cents per ewe pre-lambing. That's in total. So if you go on a good quality ration there at €400 a ton at the minute, and you say step that back to a lesser quality ration, say at €380 a ton, you're saving €20 a ton, but that's equates to only a total saving of 50 cents a ewe. So I suppose it's correcting the nutrition in late pregnancy. That'll reduce labour requirements then around lambing. So you're going to have lively lambs. You're not going to have stomach tubing lambs, getting them up. You're going to have good quality colostrum, which is going to help prevent infections and get lambs going, prevent infections later. So it's that being, I suppose, being penny wise, not being penny wise and pound foolish, that you're not afraid that you're not spending that bit extra. That extra 20, 30 euro a ton, it's very little of you to get down to a euro basis, and it's definitely worth it in the long run. So that's the chart I was talking about, looking at how much to feed. We can see the dry matter digestibility, the silage down the left-hand side of this. We have 55, 60%, so on, 60, 65, 65 to 70 DMD silage up the left. And then we have how much we feed across, so 10 to 9 weeks out, 8 to 7, 6 to 5, etc. So we'll look at 65 to 70 DM, so that average to good kind of average silage that we'd have across the country and most farms. We're looking at that 8 to 7 weeks, we're at 0.1 kilo per head per day. We're stepping that up then 6 weeks, we're at 0.4, for a month out we're 0.6, and at 2 weeks out we're 0.8. This is for a 7 kilo ewe. Again, it's increasing it up, stepping up if you have heavier ewes, a bit lower if you have lighter ewes. And then for singles and triplets, so the chart above here that we can see is for twins. For singles, we're reducing each of them by 30%. For triplets, we're increasing it by 30%. So that's just a wee feeding chart showing you how to break it up. As I said earlier, we can then group ewes. Triplets are lambing a bit further out, and as twins are lambing in the first week, we can then group them in batches that coming up to lambing, they'll be getting the same amount. And it helps if we have smaller numbers of ewes and we have maybe a smaller number of pens available. So that's just the last one on feeding the ewe here now is just a quick slide in managing pregnant ewe lambs. So I suppose current high lamb prices, and a lot of farmers now breeding ewe lambs to increase farm output. There's a lot more people breeding ewe lambs, and it's just a few points in that on how to manage that ewe lamb before and after lambing. So we should be firstly feeding that ewe lamb to gain weight the whole way out throughout pregnancy, so from start to finish, and not to be afraid to push these ewe lambs early and mid-pregnancy, keep them growing. I suppose there is a fear of oversized lambs, but it's more often the case that ewe to lamb disproportion, or them lambs that are too big or that we're definitely lambing. More often the case it's that the ewe lamb's too small, not that the lamb's too big. So it's getting that lamb getting that ewe lamb that's lambing down to the best or the highest birth weight, or the highest body weight at lambing possible. So the last month we said 50% of the growth, so we can push her on hard up to that last month, and then it's not cutting it off then. So we're still supplementing her ewe lambs right up to lambing, not cutting it off completely. You're cutting it back a bit, but not off completely. So a ewe lamb requires an extra 2.5 megajoules of energy or metabolizable energy a day relative to a mature ewe, the same live weight. So if you have a 70 kilo ewe, or we'll say a 60 kilo ewe and a 60 kilo ewe lamb, that ewe lamb needs another 2.5 megajoules of energy a day. This is for growing. She's still growing. The ewe's only maintaining herself. The ewe lamb's growing. So that's the same as giving ewes that are housing that, say, medium quality, that's 65, 70 DMD silage. She requires an extra 200 grams of that good quality meal per head per day to meet them growing demands, to grow herself while growing the lamb, producing colostrum, that mammary tissue. So just at one point, then a final point on managing these ewe lambs. So preferably that you wouldn't be letting them out with twin lambs in the first year, but some people it's not an option. You have larger litter size. So if letting them out, then you're managing these ewe lambs rearing twins the same as a mature ewe rearing triplets, that you're creep feeding them lambs from months old and you're feeding them ewes. Them ewes are getting half a kilo out of grass to feed them on if they are reared, to keep them growing while growing the lamb along with them. So just a few points on that there. It was kind of topical that there's a lot of people lambing ewe lambs this year. So I suppose we look there at the feeding of the ewe lamb, or feeding of the ewe in general, getting birth rate right, getting healthy lambs. We're now going to look at keeping them lambs alive. So that's a picture what we all want to see, a ewe or two lambs happy out of grass and thriving. And how do we get there? We're looking now at infections and how we'll prevent them, keeping lambs healthy, and we'll look at them. So the infections are the main cause there in that study done, the main cause in a lot of indoor lambing flocks. So we'll do a few different scenarios now, how to minimize the risk of them and what we can do, I suppose. The first one I'm looking at is abortions. So these account for a large proportion of infections that are dead at birth. So these lambs that die, they're due to infection, they're dead at birth. A lot of these are down to abortions. Sometimes it goes unnoticed, it's kind of underlying there. But to reduce the risk of that abortion, the advice would be to keep a closed flock where possible. We're all going to have our abortions. Listen, it's in every flock, they're 2, 4, 5%. We're going to have them abortions, some of them due to hurts, some of them underlying cases. But if a ewe aborts, just a few points here on the ewe herself should be isolated straight away as soon as after she aborts. Hygiene practice then around the aborted fetus and placenta. So we want them sealed in a bag, disposed of correctly. We don't want the ewe or the dog in the yard ponding about. We don't want the ewes and the pen getting these aborted fetuses or placentas. All material then cleaned out and the pen disinfected. So any material, any blood, any the stuff cleaned out, the pen disinfected. Then if you have a suspect case, that you're sending for post-mortem to get a cause of mortality, to get that, what caused the mortality. If a problem is confirmed from the post-mortem, we then seek veterinary advice. We put on a treatment plan where possible and investigate a vaccination plan for the following year. So we can't vaccinate then, but we can vaccinate before the next breeding season, so 40 days before the next breeding season. But that's to be discussed through your vet. We're looking then at management before lambing. So in Ireland, as I said earlier, 3/4 of ewes and lowland farms are housed for lambing, and 90% of these are housed in straw beds. So it's looking at managing these straw beds, keeping them clean. So it starts off, I suppose, with a clean pen for the ewes to lamb down in. That involves clean, fresh straw. This will reduce navel infection, as that straw is the first thing the lamb's navel touches. When the lamb comes out, that straw or that bed's the first thing it touches. Keeping that clean, fresh, keeping that infection out of that. This will also prevent ewes' fleeces or their teats becoming soiled, so no dung or feces on the teats of the fleeces, and it'll stop lambs ingesting these infections. So when a lamb gets up and attempts to suck, that's the first thing it latches onto, that teat or the wool, latches onto that soiled fleece. That'll prevent infection. So keeping the navel clean and preventing the infection through the mouth is the two main avenues we're looking at. So I suppose as stated previously, the main time of death for infection was just after lambing there. And applying iodine, so a good opportunity to do this is when you're taking the lambs from that grip pen into the individual lamb pens. So applying iodine to lamb's navel as soon as possible after birth, and then ensuring them ewes' teats are clean. So the survey we've seen that applying iodine is generally well implemented in farms. 80% of the farmers in that survey were applying iodine to the lamb's navel. So there might be an opportunity to improve the method of administration or maybe the type of iodine. So we're looking to buy a good strong 10% iodine solution. There's an option too with mixing iodine with methylated spirits at 10%, 10%. So mixing them half and half and diluting it down. This will dry out the navel a lot quicker. It'll get the iodine into where it's wanted. It'll spread the iodine into where it's wanted. And again, vets are recommending this here in some particular cases where maybe there is a problem with navel ills or with joint ills. So, and it's just that you're covering the navel fully. A teat dip cup, the dairy farmers use for dipping cows' teats in, definitely a better way of covering the whole navel. But if you're using the spray, if you're just spraying it, that you're covering the whole navel, especially around the base of it, and getting plenty of iodine on it, not just down the belly there. So it's just that iodine, and as soon as possible after birth, it'll reduce lamb mortality. Then on to them individual lamb pens, we'll get the lambs across into them. So they're great for mothering, using lambs up together, and for monitoring lambs in them first few days to see, make sure they're up, make sure they're thriving. 88% of farmers use these individual lamb pens in survey, but only 40% of them are cleaning and disinfecting after each use. So the rest of them were, some were just cleaning them out, some were disinfecting, but often they're just one you vacates, another one in, not clean. So ideally they should be cleaned out and disinfected between each use. So that's removing the straw, any feces, any placenta, or the cleanings from the ewe before. They all harbour infections. Removing them, sweeping the pen clean, then a good thick layer. So you see the second picture there, a good thick layer of hydrated lime or Stalston powder. Then that's to prevent a buildup of any moisture, bacteria. Then we're looking then a good thick clean bed of straw. So you want plenty of straw to prevent the lambs navel getting in contact with the ground. And then I suppose we have our happy lambs in the side. So we said lamb pens, they are definitely beneficial when used correctly, and we encourage that ewe lamb bonding. And farmers not surveyed that used individual lamb pens, they reared an extra 0.13 lambs per ewe, and they had a higher gross margin 19 years ago. So they definitely have the place. It's just using them lamb pens correctly. Colostrum, now that's the last point around the hygiene and around preventing infection. So I know that IgG transfer is very important for passive immunity. Lambs, when they're born, they have no immunity at all, so they require adequate quantities of quality colostrum, and it has to be in the first 24 hours to prevent infection. So a newborn lamb, the first point we see there, a newborn lamb, it requires 50 ml of colostrum per kilo of body weight, and it requires that for 4 feeds in the first 24 hours. So we want the first feed as soon as possible after birth, and it requires 4 of them in the first 24 hours. So for example, a 5 kilo twin lamb, we need a litre of colostrum in the first 24 hours. That's 4 250 ml feeds, and has to get that in the first 24 hours. We see in the next point then, farmers that had a stored source of colostrum had lower lamb mortality. So again, it just goes back to being prepared for lambing. We're all going to have ewes that lamb down with mastitis or lamb down with no colostrum. It's being prepared for that, having a stored source of that good natural colostrum. So ewes colostrum, it's the most beneficial, whether that be from the mother of the lamb or another ewe on your farm. But it has to be got freshly. So it's best the whole lot of you can lamb or milk a ewe in the pen next door, but she has to be freshly lambed, because the IgG percentage of that colostrum, it drops off so quickly after lambing. If she's lambed for 12-15 hours, the percentage IgG in that colostrum is going to be low already. So if she's not freshly lambed, another option is to milk her when she is freshly lambed. So I say a ewe with a single lamb there, surplus colostrum. That colostrum and the IgG in it, it'll last for 4 to 5 days in a fridge or chilled, or you can freeze it. You can freeze it in small quantities, and that'll facilitate it. That'll allow you to thaw it out enough for each lamb. So freeze it there in 100 ml or 200 ml containers, and you thaw that then and use it. So we want to thaw it at body temperature. You're not using a microwave, you're not using boiling water. You're thawing it at body temperature, and then you're giving it, administrating it at body temperature too. Cow's colostrum is another source of natural colostrum available. It should be fed at 20% more than the recommended that we said there. That's to get over the reduced concentration on it. Just one point on using cow's colostrum, it should be from a pooled number of cows, so it shouldn't be from one cow. Some cows, in some cases, cow colostrum contains antibodies that attack the red blood cells in lambs. It's only in some cases now. This cow's colostrum attacks the red blood cells. The lambs then become anemic. So it's fine if it's from a pooled source or from a number of cows, but you're not just giving all the colostrum from one cow in case you're unlucky enough that it was one that had these antibodies present. So the other point then is looking at the artificial colostrum. So 68% of the farmers were administering this artificial colostrum. That's not a problem. It's the 10% that are using it as their only alternative source. So if they have no colostrum, they're using this artificial as their only alternative source. So it's critical to check the IgG source and the concentration of IgG in that artificial colostrum, as many of them are either too low or they're not absorbable in newborn lambs at all. So you're ensuring that you're buying, there's 2 different types, a colostrum substitute or a colostrum supplement. So you're ensuring that you're buying the colostrum substitute and not the supplement, as the concentration of that IgG, it varies greatly depending on the two. So even using either one of them, there is a lot of evidence to show that little or no IgG transfer in newborn lambs are fed only artificial colostrum. So while it's a great source of energy there, it gets lambs up, it gets them to the feet, it gets them sucking, or it's very good there to stretch the amount of natural colostrum or your cow's colostrum you have, maybe for larger litters. It's very important to pull that artificial colostrum. So if you have a ewe lambs down with triplets, she only has enough milk for 2 of the lambs, you're milking out, you're adding the artificial colostrum, the ewe's colostrum, and then you're spreading that across the 3, that no one sheep is getting all the artificial colostrum. I suppose then just a point on the stomach tubes. So farmers in that survey that use stomach tubes, they had a higher gross margin for ewes, so it was beneficial. They're a great job for weak lambs, get them going. You know that the milk's definitely get into them, but good hygiene practices required around them. So another video there, it's on YouTube again. The Teagasc sheep specialists do it there. It's a bucket or a video using 3 buckets. It's explaining how to keep that hygiene and that lambing utensils disinfected and clean. So the first bucket contains warm water and soap or fairy liquid, washing it in that warm water. The second bucket, we have Milton or disinfectant. You're dipping it, washing, disinfectant, and the third bucket is just clean water just to rinse it off. They'll last for a day and a half, and you can change it then, a new bucket for the next day, and it keeps the hygiene. You're not putting, and that should be done, especially with stomach tube between each lamb. You're not putting the stomach tube into one lamb, taking it out, maybe a coli in that lamb's stomach, and you're passing it to the next lamb. So it's just keeping that hygiene right and keeping the infection out. So I suppose lastly, and certainly not least, just a slide on health and safety. So a few very important points around lambing here. I know it's busy on all farms, and we can't really afford not to injure. We can't afford to be not there or out of action at this point. So it's a few points just in health and safety and things that we can be aware of around lambing. So the first one up here is zoonotic diseases. That's diseases that go from animals to humans. So your toxin, your enzo, these can cause abortion in pregnant women. So pregnant women shouldn't be in contact with the old lambing at all. But that also stretches maybe to overalls or protective gear. So if there's pregnant women in the house, they should be left outside or washed outside, not taken into the house at all. We have two other diseases there. Orphan Wales disease. Again, ours very painful. The Wales disease, that can be got from rats there and straws or in waterways. So it's important if you're bedding pens and that, we don't know where the straw comes from in the majority of cases, that you're wearing gloves and you're wearing protective gear. So the next point in personal protective equipment or PPE. This is to prevent infections and septicemia. So Paddy's going to chat about this in a minute, looking at reducing the risk of spreading infections from animals. But I'm just looking at the importance of it. So we all think it's supposed to won't happen to ourselves, won't get anything. But I know of a lady last year, same age as myself, died after getting septicemia from taking rotten lambs out of a ewe. She had a cut in her hand. So it's always wearing lambing gloves, always protecting yourself. So you're number one yourself. Animals come a second, then so protecting them. The next point, having good lighting. Again, Paddy's going to cover a bit on that. Now is a good point that if you can change put in some LED lights instead of fluorescent ones, and if there is lights up, tube lights or covers that we can come down, clean them now. That'll prevent trips and falls and around lambing. Something as simple as an injured leg, like that's going to slow us up in lambing time. So it's having good lighting around the place. Children then. So it is nice to have children out lambing, I suppose, new life in the farm and teaching the trade. But it's a very dangerous time. So children account for 10% of them mortalities. I just have a few points there on bales and barrels. So that's stacking round bales of straw. They're not a climbing frame for children. It's keeping them away from them, and being aware of them risks. Barrels of water, something as simple as sending the kids to fill the water into the lambing pen, send them off to the bucket. You have a barrel outside that's water filling into it. If they can't reach into the barrel, being aware that they might not open up to them risks, I suppose, that they're not stretching over. I've seen a video there recently at a risk or farm safety one where a child stretching into the barrel, fill a bucket of water, fell in head first as a risk of drowning. Tanks then, I suppose, everyone there on some sheep farms, some will have beef or suckler farms, beef too. The slurry season and manhole that covers mixing points, and that's covered. Quads then, listen, have their place, great for feeding sheep outside, turning out ewes and lambs. They're again back to the children. We're keeping children off them. We're wearing a protective gear, wearing helmets, and just being generally safe around them. Final point I have there is tiredness. So that we're sleeping and eating, and I suppose it's something that's overlooked at. We are busy at lambing time, but if it's only taking in somebody for 2 hours, letting you get away, letting you get out of the thing, recharge the batteries, you'll not only be increasing the risk to harm yourself, if you're at it and charge the batteries and get a hot meal, get a dinner each day, you'll be more aware of what's going on. You're going to pick up things quicker. You're going to reduce your mortality. So it's looking after yourself, and that'll result in looking after the sheep. So I'm going to finish up now on a few take-home messages. So 43% of the lamb losses we've seen occurred at or prior to birth. Infection of stochia accounted for 52% of them. Both these were potentially preventable. By identifying the cause of mortality, we can then implement correct practices. We've seen dystocia that can be reduced with that pregnancy nutrition plan we talked about, but we have to have expected litter size, lamb date, and the forage or the silage quality. Buying them constructs based on ingredients and not price, and that'll help with colostrum and help with lamb birth weight. Finally, hygiene around lambing. Infection, that was the main cause. So we want to apply iodine correctly. We want to clean, disinfect them lamb pens and clean, disinfect any lamb utensils. The use of them individual lambing pens then, they did reduce, or they did increase the number of lambs reared per ewe joined and then increase gross margin. It's just using them correctly. We must ensure that the lambs receive adequate quantities of that natural, that good quality colostrum. And I suppose health and safety should be prioritized. It's a priority at all times, but I suppose it's definitely a priority around lambing time. So folks, look after yourselves. It's being aware of them risks to yourself, being aware of the risks of mortality. I suppose it works hand in hand, and I wish you the best luck with lambing. I'll answer any questions after. I'll hand you back to Cian now. So thanks very much, folks.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Dwayne. That's excellent. Very comprehensive presentation there. An awful lot of stuff covered. So if you want to stop sharing there, Dwayne, and we'll get Paddy's presentation up next.
Yeah, definitely.
Lovely. Thanks very much. Paddy, are you ready there? Paddy, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Cian. Thanks everyone for joining tonight. Dwayne there covered a bit on lowland lambing and indoors and prolific flocks, and now tonight I'll continue on and cover a bit on hill flocks and lambing outdoors. So Dwayne kind of covered indoor lambing and the hygiene and the risks involved. So the two types. So if you take a hill flock there that after scanning removes their twins and takes them in and lambs them after their lowland flock inside indoors, so they'll be classed as lambing indoors. So I'll just concentrate on the lambing outdoors and move on from there. So on your top left-hand screen there, so you're just lambing outside, whether it's single or twin, how we manage that and make that more safe and reduce the risk involved for infection. So moving on, the first slide I have there is lambing totally outdoors. Not 100% infection free, but far less infection build up compared to indoor lambing. So it's out in the fresh air. The possibility of a ewe lambing in the exact same spot as another ewe which has infection build up would be quite small. So it's fresh. The ewe would pick a kind of dry, a safe place. Her mothering instincts coming in, and get that lamb up on ground and get sucked right away. So where are we at the present time? A lot of people ask, do we prepare for lambing a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks from lambing? Actually, you prepare for lambing once you take the rams off post-mating. So the first one there is the rams, taking off the rams, and how do we manage the rams post-mating in terms of management and making sure that they're bringing back up to their own body weight again that they lost during their 6 weeks mating. So how we manage them. I'll talk a wee bit about the body condition of the ewe. I know Dwayne covered there a lot on the feeding of the ewe, but like anything, like how for addressing the amount of feed and when to start, as the first thing is how we have to address the condition of the ewe and what stage is she at and how much level of feeding does she require, whether if she's a 10 ewe or if she's in reasonably good condition. So I'll talk a wee bit about the ewe health. Topics that I was mentioned there, a wee bit about the vaccination program and liver fluke, which is a common problem for ewe flocks. So touching back there, consultation with the farmer, with the vet, local vet, and drawing up his annual animal health plan, and that'll be built into it. I'll talk a wee bit about the grazing and different types of hill grazing, where's the dry heat, wet heat, blanket bog, etc., and how to manage these in the springtime. Scanning, I know Dwayne covered there, but scanning is why is important for health flocks, whether it's to remove the dry stock and eliminate their feeding and the cost involved with them, or is it to remove the twins and separate them as a separate flock for feeding. The Lamin Environment, then we'll touch a wee bit in terms of Lamin outdoors, how to manage that in terms of making it as safe as possible, and how to put that in place for the yo. I'll touch a wee bit about, I know Dwayne covered a lot about the hygiene, but I'll mention a few hygiene problems for outdoors and how to reduce that. Also the health and safety for lambing outdoors in terms of, as Dwayne says, tiredness comes into play, and also lighting, and also be aware of where you are at all times during lambing. If you're going to hill for checking yours early in the morning or late at night, and biosecurity. So that's the kind of outline of my presentation. I'll go through and then I'll take questions at the end. So that's the kind of broad plan of preparing for lambing for outdoors and putting plans in place to help us. So the first slide I have is, people don't realize, is they forget about it, the importance of the ram on the sheep flocks, is when they're post mating, they forget about the ram, and it's a very valuable asset on the farm. So the overall cost, if you're buying a ram prior to mating, the cost of it and that cost translate per lamb in the following breeding season. So reducing that cost per lamb on the sheep flock is important. So the three ways that I kind of mention here is reducing the overall cost per lamb on sheep farms, is increasing yo to lamb ratio without affecting reproduction performance, is increasing the number of yos that we put to the ram without affecting the ram's performance. Now the average somewhere would be around between the 35-40 yos per ram. The second one is increasing the yo litter size. I know that's very important for lowland flocks, but ideally for a hill flock, we're aiming for a lamb per yo, somewhere in the average of 0.8 to 1.3 or 1.1 to 1.3. So we're looking for going the yo back to the hill with a lamb at foot. The third one then is increasing the lamb longevity. So getting the ram, picking the ram, which is very important, first to buy with good genetics, but also having that ram in flocks for a second or a third year to reduce the overall cost per lamb. So for the hill flocks, we'll concentrate primarily on the third option there, increasing the ram longevity. So we won't get too bogged in the figures here. I want you to take it home one or two simple messages. This graph here, so we're taking a typical hill flock weaning 1.1 lambs. So if we look on the left-hand side there, going down top to bottom, we're taking a ram cost of 300 at a ram, down to a ram costing 800, a ram with different genetics. And on the top there in the blue line, we're taking the lifespan from 2 to 4 years. 4 years having from 2 to 4 years on the flock. The second line then is number of yos put to the ram, starting from 30 up to 50. Basically that it doesn't affect his overall performance, reproductive performance. So I have one there highlighted there, is what we're explaining is, if we put 30, if there's 30 yos put to a ram that's costing €300, going by 2 years, so 1.1 lamb per weaned, so that's 33 lambs. If the ram is on 2 years, you get 2 lamins, so that's 66 lambs. So that'll work out of each lamb to be an overall, the ram cost of 4 years 55 cents. Now, we're not bogged down in the figures, but if we extend that life of the ram for a third year on the flock and increase the number of yos per ram to 40, we can see there that the cost is the same equivalent to buying a ram costing 600, maybe that would have higher genetics and better lamb performances. It would be the same overall cost per lamb. So that's what I just want to highlight there, is that to look at the cost per ram as a valuable asset on the farm and to look after. The causes, next one's the potential causes or mortality in rams. These are potential ones. The main ones is fighting post-mating. Something there to reduce this is after post-mating is to put them into a confined space, and the first 24 hours after putting them together, till they come close together to get to their own scent off each other, and they will be less prone to fight afterwards. Second point there is a turn out to grass late evening when they're hungry. And the third one then is if they're still potential fighting, is a face shield to prevent charging or running at each other. The health issues as a second one I'll mention there is after post-mating is rams with lameness. Now I know I mentioned there the second point is stomach worms. That's more for ram lambs post-mating. They can pick up a level of infection during mating time. Liver fluke and clostridial diseases. What I mentioned here that they're in the clostridial disease and vaccination program along with the overall flock. If that program is in place on the farm, every farm is different. Liver fluke as well, have they picked up an infection over the mating period. The third one, as I'll briefly talk about, is nutrition. The body weight loss of the ram during mating and the 6 weeks mating season. Rams can lose up to 15 to 20% of their body weight. One between 1 and 1.5 body condition score. 10 to 25 kilos of live weight. So the important thing is getting that level of weight or condition back on the ram as soon as we can, because we want this ram, if it's a good quality ram with good genetics, to be available for next breeding season. So Dwayne covered a lot there about feeding the ewe. But first of all, I think it's very important that we know when and how much we should be feeding. So the most important thing is the body condition score our ewes. Know what level our ewes are at before we start feeding and how much we have to feed. So why do we body condition score our ewes? Is to manage the nutritional requirement of the flock. Know what level our flock are at, and know what do require feeding and how much. So a lot of people ask, when do we body condition score our ewes? Anytime our ewes are in the pen, whether for dosing or treatments, we should always handle our ewes. It's just a matter of running up the chute and putting our hands on their backs and body condition scoring them. So how do we do it? It's done by placing our hand on the sheep's backbone and short ribs, testing the level of cover on their backs, the level of fat and tissue on their backbone, and an end of the short ribs, as well as the fullness of the muscle in between. So it's determined between a level between a score of 1 to 5. Score 1 it'll be a very, very poor ewe, and score 5 a very fat ewe. So I just mentioned the extremes. Score 1, the spinous process are prominent and sharp. You see there the backbone, you can feel clearly. You can nearly see it coming through the wool. The fingers can be pushed easily between each process. The ribs and the loin is thin and no fat cover, so you can actually see the rib cage coming through. Score 3 is mainly we're aiming for at different stages of the year, as the spinal process are smooth and rounded. We can only feel it, the backbone, with slight pressure. The transverse process are smooth and well covered, and when we have the wee pressure, we can feel them. And score 5, you can't feel the backbone. There's a wee dimple in the fat, and the processes, the loin muscles are very full and covered with a thick layer of fat. So ideally, we're aiming for round about that's a score 3. There's certain periods of time that they might fall below target score, but we're ideally aiming for a score of 3. So I'm going to concentrate a bit on the hill ewes. So that the 4 main points of the year that we should be targeting for body condition score for very important reasons is for during mating. So we're ideally looking for a score of 3. The same goes for scanning, and then the Lamin then ideally around 2.5, 2.3, 2.5. The weaning down to 1.5. So the Lamin weaning, she'll lose body condition score because she'll milk off her back for the first 2 weeks until she hits peak milk production. So mating time is maximizing why is important is maximizing the litter size and results in compact Lamin. Now, mainly for hill flocks, we're looking for a lamb per ewe, but compact Lamin is very beneficial to the farmer. Scanning time, it gives the ewes the opportunity to be an optimal body condition score at Lamin time. So we don't want the ewes to be too good body condition score, but we don't want them to be too thin as well. So at Lamin time, it helps to maximize colostrum production, lamb birth weight, and vigor. I know Dwayne covered a lot on it, but you want plenty of colostrum and milk, and you want to give birth to a good, strong lamb and good vigor that he gets up and he sucks, and he has some there to suck. Good call to colostrum for Lamin outdoors. So moving on to ewe health. The first one is liver fluke, and then I'll mention a wee bit on the vaccination program. I won't be just dwell on it. So we chat a lot about the liver fluke, and it's a very important topic, but I'll just briefly go back to the main one there as we have to think about is the mud snail and the important factor it plays in the life cycle of the liver fluke. So I know I'm conscious of time, and Cian. So the couple ones there for the life cycle is the moisture and the temperature plays a major factor in it. And every year is different in terms of the climate, but we have to be conscious and also taking into account the farm. Every farm is different, and also the history on the farm. So the the mud snail, putting on the cesaria, passing through, going onto the grass, the yolk digesting, and passing through the eggs again. So I'll move on. So it's a minimum 6 weeks life cycle. So for diagnosis control, farm history is important, very important. Every farm is different. There's some farms out there that has a high level of fluke and other farms that haven't. So regional information in terms of the Department of Agriculture forecast, in terms of periods that are a high risk to liver fluke. Post-mortem diagnosis, whether it's culls in the factory or actual post-mortems. But your brackets there, when post-mortem, maybe it's too late that you have an infection there. Physical signs in terms of bottlenecks, the whiteness around the pupils is another one, and also the wool as well. Lab testing, FEC counts, I'll put a question mark there, too late, is it? Because you have to diagnose it early and be ahead of it. Control, I have done a control from primarily antibiotic based, but management can play a role, especially for lowland flocks if they're housing their flock over winter. They're not picking up new infection. So I have here, I know the importance is there is sitting down with your vet and drawing up an annual plan with your vet and for a control plan in place. So it's very. So I have here a lot of people ask what products to use. I say is to make sure to be buying a product what you're targeting for. So I have there weeks and age in the life cycle. So you've got there the early immature, week 1 to 5. Your immature, week 5 to 10, and your adults 10 weeks plus. So speak to your local vet when you're seeking a product, and get your product that targets the actual infection. So a couple of ones there. So Generally, only chronic forms seen in cattle. All 3 disease types can be a problem in sheep. So you got your acute there, immature time of year roughly is October to January. Subacute, immature, and mature October, January as well. Rapid weight loss, possible stomach and jaw swelling, yet untreated. So you got your mature as well, then gradual weight loss, possible stomach and jaw swelling, and possible death, January to April. So the time of year can vary due to wet years and mild winters as well. So Dwayne there mentioned the economic loss. I'll mention the economic loss due to liver fluke, the reduced performance. It's a lower body condition score of the ewes. She'll have a lower litter size. If she goes in lamb, she mightn't go in lamb. Longer lambing spread. Loss of liver not function correctly, not able to function, and mortality. So the aim of the treatment in autumn time is to prevent the immature fluke migration development following ingestion of metacardiae. Winter then is to kill the adult and immature fluke, prevent liver damage and ill thrift. And in the spring and early summer to remove adult fluke burden accumulated from the previous year's infection. So the vaccination program, also speak to your vet. Is it a thing that's done on your farm? Is there history there, or do you have to start a vaccination program if there's a problem there on farm level? So a couple of ones there I just want to point out. So if people are carrying out their annual vaccination program, remember replacement ewes if you buy in ewes. Are they vaccinated with a primary course or are they not? So if they're not, you're doing them with a primary course 4 weeks apart. You're going in then with your second booster. So your second course or your booster, you're targeting 4 to 6 weeks prior to lambing. You want to build up antibodies in the colostrum that's passed on to the lamb when the lamb gets its first suck. So just remember there is to have your rams, your barn ewes, and hoggers to be included in the yearly booster as well. And that's in your vaccination program. As for your examples like dysentery, pulp kidney, struck, tetanus, braxy, and back leg, etc. But speak to your local vet and draw up your annual animal health plan that covers your vaccinations and also your dosing programs. So talking about the grazing now of the ewes. So I have 2 slides here. One of them is Donegal Sheep Better Farm putting his ewes back to the hill. And then the second one on your right there is your ewes starting to separate out on the hill and going to their own locations. But the main point there is your different types of hill. You got your dry heat, wet heat, blanket bogs, and also if the ewes were off there from pre-mating there from the start of November, there should be a good cover of grass and clean on the hill for going back on. I'll talk about then if there wasn't, and then if the ewes were in poor body condition score, you're chatting then about supplementary feeding concentrates. I know Dwayne covered that, so I'll just mention a bit on space requirements, feed trough space, so it's very important. So it's very important in terms of, I'll go down there, I won't mention the shore, onshore, the difference between heavy ewes and light ewes, but also overlooked is if you're indoors is the corners of the pens. That's forgotten about. So the most important thing, if there isn't enough field space for outdoor feeding, if the ewes are pushing in or if they're jumping up, you might have lead to prolapse or abortion issues. So I'll mention there for non-ad lib meal feeding. So for indoors, you're chatting between 450 and 600 millimeters headspace indoors. For outdoors, double-sided troughs, you're looking between 300 and 500 millimeters. All ewes need to be able to eat meals together. You don't want ewes that are pushing and can't get into the feed trough and are jumping up and causing harm to other ewes, especially ewes that are heavy in lamb. So you're cleaning out your forage regularly trough. If there's any forage left at the corners or the edges, You clean them at least once weekly, clean out in case there's any infection build up. Ensure ewes have access to clean water at all times. If you're feeding outdoors, place your troughs somewhere where there's clean water, running water if possible. Stagnant water, you don't want ewes to be drinking that. So just a picture there, if you can, to be feeding ewes on a hardcore feed area. If that is not available or no access, place your troughs in a dry area and move them if they start getting dirty in the feed area. You don't want contamination on the ground to be going into the trough where the meal is, and also to avoid lameness for dirty feed areas. And also not to be placing troughs too near to water courses where erosion or dirty erosion can go into the rivers or the streams. So scanning, I won't mention that because I'm conscious of time, and Dwayne covered. So all I mentioned is your group is great for hill flocks, is your group according to litter size. So whether it's the case you're putting you always carrying multiple lambs back to the hill, or you're keeping them at a lower ground and you're meeting them or feeding them with their high nutritional demand. So you manage them as a separate group. If it's the case that you can pull out your barn ewes and to place them along with your hoggets and stuff like that, so you're not feeding dry ewes, which is not economical, viable. I'll talk about on the Lamin Environment. So actually, when we go down to the nitty-gritty of the ewe starting the lamb, it's quite important to help that ewe with her mothering capabilities to give her the best chance to get the lamb born and up on its feet and sucking. The first one there is a lot of times after taking their twins down to low ground is the importance of keeping that low ground clean and closed, making a closing plan there for post-mating that it's clean so they come onto fresh grass in the spring. The next one is important. If you are bringing them down, try and bring them down a week or 2 weeks at possible before lambing to get the ewes known to the area and to pick out the best spots for lambing. Now, what I mean that is the ewe will know where to go in terms of shelter, whether there's trees, whether there's no building or hedgerow along the farm. Gives her the best chance as well is to identify places to cross if it's streams or rivers, because once she lambs, she'll be coming across with a lamb or 2 lambs at her foot. So she might jump over the water course, 2 lambs might not. So once she knows the area, she'll pick the best spots to cross. Also, to have a place for lambing that has clean water flowing, because if you're meal feeding with ewes, whether there's a nut or a mix, that you have good clean water for you, especially for ewes lambing to drink a lot of water post lambing. So it's very important. Hedgerows as well, if there's hedgerows on the farm there for shelter from lambing. And I think that was Paul Boyle, the Better Farm, putting his ewes down last spring before lambing. So the biggest killers for lambs for outdoor lambing, there's probably starvation, exposure, and hypothermia, depending on the area and also depending on the weather conditions. So I won't go too much on the milk, the feeding aside. Dwayne covered that well. What I will do for outdoor lambing is ensure ewes with big teats that lambs don't suck. Identify them after lambing when you're culling your ewes, and to cull them out of your flock, because it's a big factor in outdoor lambing. The lamb's not able to suck, and mortality issues there. Also, ewes that lamb down lambs with poor vigor, genetics to knees, you have to assist those lambs to feed. Try and cull any ewes like that from the flock. So supervision after lambing is essential. Dwayne covered the 50 ml of colostrum per 1 kilogram body weight every 6 hours, 1 liter in the first 24 hours, which is vital. Lamb to get as much colostrum in him as quick as he can to give him the best chance to get him up and going. Train farmers to stomach tube, which is essential for weak lambs. and also identify stages of hypothermia and how to deal with lambs at various. So depending if the shelter isn't there on the farm, hypothermia, if the weather is bad, will be a big issue for outdoor lambing. Biosecurity is a big one on farms, as if you're purchasing new animals. I know Dwayne mentioned about, but if you're buying in, especially at this time of year or coming up to lambing, buying in ewes from other flocks, you don't know what the ewes are carrying in with them. They mightn't show physical signs of it, but it could be down the line in a month, 6 weeks, in terms of foot problems. You just don't know. So it's very important to quarantine these animals for a while first, and if you could manage them as a separate flock, because there is no time frame there to keep them, whether to say 2 weeks, a month, 6 weeks. It's better if you can manage them as a separate flock, till you know for sure that they're not taking anything out. And have a footpath on your hill flock farm at your gate. A lot of farmers would have a lowland flock and a hill flock, so taking infection from either side, either taking it to the hill flock or bringing it back. So it's good to footpath at the gate and dip your feet, and change your overalls if you can. Another one is sharing equipment between hill flocks and lowland. No equipment or machinery shared between both farms. So if you can, if possible, any equipment for lambing aids and stuff like that, to have a separate one for your hill flock, if possible. Also, your clothing between flocks, clothing that's not changed or between flocks or washed down or disinfectant well. So that minimizes the infection between both. So I mentioned there, I know Dwayne covered a lot of it, is the hygiene. So lambing indoors. So if you're lambing indoors, your twins or your multiple lambs scanned is more like as lowland lambing indoors. Lambing outdoors, the 2 points of hygiene is a newborn lamb. So the best one, if you have a dirty feed area and the yolks are getting dirty, the teats are getting dirty, the first point of infection for the lamb is when he goes to suck that teat, the level of infection or the soiled teat will be the first thing into his mouth. So high rate. Also, the shepherd, if he's handling ewes and assisting lambing, is to wear good quality gloves and clean equipment when he's lambing. And as I said, have a separate, if you can, equipment from the lowland. Most of the people, some of them are lambing their hill flock after completing their lowland flock, but it can overlap at times.
Yeah, Paddy, just it's 9:10.
Yeah, health and safety is gloves. Also, the good quality handling pen if you have to house ewes for assistant lambing, but also good quality footwear, because you'll be doing a lot of walking and at springtime. But a more important point there is a mobile phone to make people aware at home where you be for if you're up early in the morning or late at night, checking ewes. So observe ewes with natural light if fall possible, either before it gets dark in the evening time or the first thing in the morning. Avoid injury. And the take-home messages is take care of the ram, which is an important asset for a sheep flock. Body condition your ewes as much time as you possibly can. Animal health plan, consult with your vet and sit down with them. Minimize disease transmission if possible, and let somebody know your location. And before I go, Cian, I just want to say that Teagasc run the National Health Sheep Conference this year. It's on in the Clayton Hotel in Sligo on the 24th of February at 7 p.m. And it's open for everyone to attend. And if you cannot attend in person, it'll also be available live stream through Zoom. And you have to go to the Teagasc website to register online to get the login details. So I just want to thank you all again. And thanks for the opportunity for the webinar tonight.
Lovely, thanks very much, Paddy. If you want to stop sharing your screen there, and I will put us all back in. Dwayne, do you want to come back on screen there as well, please? And It's heading for 9:15, so we'll run through these questions hopefully fairly quickly. And thanks to everyone for bearing with us. Paddy, one of the first questions in there was about that a lot of guides are published for lowland sheep, but just about feeding meal to twin-bearing ewes in the weeks approaching lambing. Do you just want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, I suppose as long as the body condition score is correct and good quality grass available, you're chatting some twin bearing ewes coming up to lambing somewhere around with the 1.5 pounds up to lambing per day.
Okay. Dwayne, a question in here, and you did mention it during the course of your presentation there. Twin bearing ewes being fed outdoors. When should you start giving them meal?
So I suppose it's the same as what Paddy said there about body condition score, Cian. It's keeping that body condition score up to have it there to use in lactation again, that they can utilize it then. So if you have ewes on good form, I suppose it's monitoring them often, that they're not dropping back in body condition score. Sometimes you underestimate the power of this nut grass, if there is grass available, but keeping that up, I mean, it's no harm to start early with a small bit, even if it's only 1/4 kilo, 200 grams a head, and just keep that up. It'll also depend on the amount of lambs they're carrying, so the litter size. If some with a high litter size there, scanning up that 1.8 or 2, there's no harm with none of that 200 or 250 grams out 10 to 8 weeks before lambing, and then stepping up according to then as you're going up to lamb. But it's keeping that body condition on them and keeping them in good form before lambing, that we have that body condition to use whenever they lamb.
Okay, that's great. And just a second part of them is mentioning about a lick, but do you just want to comment on general minerals prior to lambing?
Is that for myself, Cian?
Yeah, if you just want to answer that as well.
I suppose, again, it depends. If you're feeding that good ration, that's buying the ration again in quality with a good mineral mix in it, or with a good mineral and vitamin pack in it, you shouldn't need to give added minerals to it. If you're feeding enough of that good ration, that good concentrate, there should be adequate minerals in it. If you think you have any problem, I mean, a blood test with a vet will identify any low minerals or low vitamins, but if you have no apparent problems and you are feeding a good quality concentrate, there should be no need to go on with any minerals.
Okay, lovely. Let me see. There's a question there, maybe Paddy, on, and I know you mentioned it again, but you might just cover it again. The feeding of meal. Do you think it's viable or necessary to feed meal to rams after the breeding season?
Well, suppose, Cian, the most important one, if it's an adult ram or a ram lamb, sometimes if ram lamb, they're continuing growing, so it's very important. But it's very important to get that body condition up as quick as possible. So if you're taking there that the ram post-mating is going to take up, say, 0.4 of a kilogram on grass alone, you have to realize the time of the year. The grass has low energy and also could be in short supply. So it could take a long, say, take that 10 kilos up, we're chatting about nearly 25 weeks of the point. So it is viable to, say, put 0.5 of kilograms concentrate in place and get that body up quicker. And it's viable to put that 25 or 30 kilos in.
Okay, thanks very much, Paddy. A couple of questions on colostrum there. So a question about whether or not ewes would get the same passive immunity from cow's colostrum. Do you just want to maybe comment first, Dwayne, on again, I know you mentioned cow's colostrum, but just maybe with regard to the antibodies that might be passed.
So listen, if the cows are supposed to expose to the same diseases in your farm, if they're running, if they're your own cows, if it's a neighbour's farm, there is the option when you're vaccinating your ewes with Heptavac or with Covaxin a month or 6 weeks before lambing, to identify, if you get the neighbour or the dairy farmer to identify what cows he is calving at say a week before you start, and to vaccinate them with the same Heptavac or the same vaccination, they'll then have the same antibodies and the same passive immunity. Obviously, some diseases aren't mixed from one to the other, but for them diseases that your Heptavac's covering or giving that passive immunity for, it's not always ideal. It's hard to pick them cows, but if you could vaccinate 6 or 7 cows, it was still again getting that from a pooled source anyway. If you could vaccinate 6 or 7 of them cows that are going to calve in that week before you start lambing, get that colostrum and freeze it then in small quantities for thawing, they will have passive immunity. Just to point out again that they should be getting at 20% higher. The IgG concentration in cow's colostrum is that much lower than the ewes colostrum. you have to feed them that 20% more to get the same concentration. So it is possible. It's just hard to identify them cows that are going to calve prior to you start lambing. So they can be given the same vaccination, your same Hepatitis, the same thing. They can be given them vaccinations, and then they will pass that immunity.
Just following on from that, with regard to the vaccination of yos, just there's questions here about when. Now I know you mentioned it, Dwayne, in yours, when exactly to treat the sheep prior to lambing, but also there's a question on, does it upset them? So maybe when exactly to do it with regard to, the general management, I suppose, of vaccination before the lambing period.
I suppose the main part of it's about handling them correctly, that you're not abusing sheep or not hurting them, that your handling facility set up well, the sheep can be managed without stressing them. You're not gathering with a dog or chasing with a dog. You're going in that. So it's recommended from 4 to 6 weeks pre-lambing. Of the people with maybe smaller flocks that are going to open a bottle of Hepativac, it only comes there in 25, 50, and 100 dose bottles. You're going to try and get the most of them covered in that window if you're only opening the one bottle. So it can go from 3 weeks out to 6. But again, if you have a tight lambing spread, most of them lambing that 3 weeks. You can go in there 3-4 weeks out from lambing, and you're not abusing them. As long as you're not abusing them, you're handling them correctly and not stressing them. That shouldn't cause any upsets. No.
Thanks very much, Dwayne. Just a question or two have come in again about the management of rams just approaching the mating season there, Paddy. And I know you mentioned one or two things, where if unfamiliar rams can, go at, fight and worried about what condition they're going to be in or damage or whatever the case may be. You just want to mention, I know you did, but just to recover that in case people missed it, just about the management of them.
The post-mating, Cian?
Well, just with regard to fighting, I know you mentioned one or two things. Yeah,
that's just post-mating. If you have 3 or 4 rams on the flock, is to put them in the close confined space so they can't charge at each other. And then once they're in a close space and getting their own scent off each other, they can tend not to fight afterwards. And then the second point was, as to let them out to grass late in the evening time or when they're a wee bit hungry, and they won't tendency not to fight. And also the place yard to avoid the charging at each other.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Paddy. Just one final question there. I'll put it to you, Dwayne. There's a question about recommended level of feeding of yos with twins after lambing, but also I mentioned there about why the condition also falls off yos a little bit after lambing. Do you just want to comment on that, intake and management with regard to that? Yeah.
I suppose, listen, and when you look yos dry or mid-pregnancy, we looked at that should a UFL requirement or an energy requirement of 0.8. The last 2 weeks of lambing, that's up to 1.37. Once she lambs, so that first 6 weeks after lambing again, that's increased again. So it's 2.5. So it's gone trebled from our ordinary maintenance. The protein requirement's gone from 100 grams to 400 grams per day. So it's the requirements that she needs. A yo rearing twin lambs and early lactation, that 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks lactation, has the same requirement, same energy requirement as a dairy cow producing 30 litres of milk. So if you think per kilo of live weight, so if you think the requirements that she needs to maintain herself, if she's not getting enough intake, which is often the case on wet grass or if grass is short, if she can't physically take in enough low dry matter and she's not getting fed concentrates, she's going to start using it off her back. So that's where the yos are formed condition. And we said earlier about if that extra unit of body condition score is there to use, it's worth the equivalent of 5 bags of barley, of whole barley. So if she has a full unit of body condition score, it goes back to maintaining that body condition in late pregnancy. If you can maintain it up to lambing, she'll have that bit to lose. They're going to lose it anyway. The requirements, and they're not going to physically be able to get in with grass alone anyway. The intake is going to increase to 2.5. It's 2 to 4, I suppose, in some cases, kilos of dry matter. So it's meeting that energy and that protein requirements and lactation. It's not, if you're not feeding them that good quality ration that is high in energy and high in protein, they're going to start using off their back and they're going to start losing condition. So I suppose I said about feeding them there, it's getting that 33, 35 UFLs energy per head for yo and twin lambs. So it's getting that 2.5, 3 kilos of dry matter into them, and it's not readily available if the grass isn't there and if there's not enough dry matter. So given half a kilo, 600 grams, depending on litter size, your body weight, and available grass to them. So anywhere from a kilo to 0.7 to a kilo rearing twin lambs for 80, 90 kilo ewes.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Dwayne. That's it here for this evening. I know it's after 9:20, so I'd like to thank everyone for staying with us. I'd like to thank Dwayne and Paddy for the presentations. I hope you found them useful and interesting. These presentations, the webinar here tonight, will be made available on our YouTube channel in the coming days. Last week's is already available on the channel. So next week's webinar will be covering calving and calf care. So another important topic at this time of year. We'd like if you can join us again. You'll find full details by following Teagasc SLD on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. That's it for this evening. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe and good night.
Thanks very much, Cian. Thanks very much, folks.